All right, you got the volume right and all like that? Alrighty. Don't touch anything. Dan's trying to sabotage you, dude. He was in here making faces at me and make me laugh and stuff. Good. Okay, this. Okay, and like I said, Frank, it's not going to be a very long one.
No problem. We just keep it going. I'm kind of excited about this web thing.
Oh, thank you. Can I bring you a check next week? Is that because I don't have it with me?
Well, I get your thing all made up. It's good enough to me.
Wonderful.
So it has your cell number on where they get a hold of you.
Good.
And you got everything. So before you leave, I'll show it to you real quick if I.
That'd be best anyway, just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
That's a little. I'll show you that.
Okay. All right. Well, good evening and welcome to Exploring Astrology with your host, Albert Stevens. That's me. Fascinating world we're living in, and astrology really contributes a lot of clarity sometimes. Sometimes, unfortunately, the reflection that we see through the astrological indications are literally doing a good job of reflecting how complicated and how undecided a given issue is for a period of time. For instance, just to illustrate that very well, back in 2000, when November rolled around and we had our election, George Bush against Gore, Mercury was retrograde. I think it turned retrograde on the day of the election, and there wasn't an astrologer who didn't predict some sort of confusion about the election. Well, it turned out to take weeks and weeks and weeks before it was straightened out. And astrology did a good job of showing the complication and the confusion at the election, but unfortunately that meant that astrology did no better at predicting the winner using the election date. So that being the case, oftentimes it's very different. Sometimes we do see a clear winner on the election day. The last time, the election of 2000 again, the clear winner was just hands down indicated by the difference between Gore's chart and Bush's chart as of the inauguration on January 20th rather than election day. Well, I thought I would start our, looking at this issue of predicting elections, and particularly this one, and start by taking a look at all the various signatures that we see immediately around the election itself, November 2nd. This would be the first step. The next step is to take a look at the situation on Inauguration Day. Well, the first step, and today we're going to discuss the general tenor or the general atmosphere around the time of the election, November 2nd. Shoot, that's a couple of days away if you're watching this Sunday immediately before the election. So let's talk for a moment. Jupiter, which is normally a planet of success, is interacting with Venus, which is a planet that represents comfort and also success. Well, Jupiter and Venus are interacting a couple of days before the election and virtually on the day or just a couple of days after the election. So this is a very strong Jupiter-Venus contact, and here's what we see out of that. Jupiter-Venus very commonly indicates the start of something. In this case, it would be the election of one or the other president, of a 4-year period that would see some success and growth and satisfaction and comfort on our part here in the United States. Actually, it's a fairly good indicator that this election could lead to global-wide benefit, which hopefully would be the case. In any case, this is a nice indicator, regardless of which party comes into power in the presidency. What is the fly in the ointment here, though, is that Jupiter oftentimes represents feeling entitled, like people or the world owe us, which may be true in some senses, but in other senses it's not true at all. The world owes us nothing. And Venus, sometimes when it's not hitting on it, its high road is about avarice and greed and just self-interest and maintaining one's own comfort even at the expense of others. It's a greed aspect. Well, Jupiter and Venus, you combine them, and if both of these things are going awry, I'm afraid this indicates that, or it could be, I'm not convinced this is the case. I don't mean to project that, but it could indicate that the United States is going to vote in such a fashion as to just simply try to vote for its interests rather than the wider interests. Now, I personally can't tell you which is the wider interests. Whether going after terrorism with the aggressiveness of George Bush is in the wider interest of the globe than a Kerry approach, which would certainly be different. I'm not going to take a position on that. But what we want to make sure, or what we would most want to do, is not just do what serves us and lets everybody else down. I know that. Americans don't want to do that. But we're pretty good at realizing that only one person's going to look after number one, and that's us. So, doggone it anyway, these things are complicated, and they cut both ways. And we've got to be aware of that and make our decision which way are we going to align ourselves. Again, I don't have a position on it. I don't want to project a liberal or a conservative position here because that's not the issue. The issue is we've got to be wise rather than greedy and self-centered. All right, and again, Bush may have the ticket. Going after terrorism with a great deal of aggressiveness as he has very well might be the right thing to do. So again, I don't want to project a solution here. Also, it does indicate that this 4 years could be a wonderful 4 years of leadership for the administration, whether it's Kerry or Bush. So, in many ways, we've got some very good indicators with Jupiter Venus, as long as we don't let it become greedy and self-serving. The next thing, on the extreme, on the very day of the election, and, that makes this signature a little bit more potent, we have, and I'll just give you the jargon, the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint comes to a conjunction with Pluto. Now, I know that's like hieroglyphics to most folk. What that amounts to is this. Jupiter-Uranus is about exciting change. Pluto is about power. So this, on the surface, talks about change of power, which would suggest a Kerry election. However, this is also a description of the election in the beginning, in a sense, of the next 4-year term. And we're going to look at that January 20th date on another episode, and it's going to tell us a lot about the next 4 years, regardless of the president. And of course, by then we will know who is elected, at least we hope so. Back to this Jupiter-Uranus thing. It's exciting as heck, but it's also very fast-paced, and it oftentimes is surprising rather than just exciting. In other words, excitement can be fun. Oh, we're going to go to the World Series. Oh, that's going to be great. I'm excited about that. Well, that's fine. Sometimes excitement can come at the price of a surprise, like a near miss in a car accident. Oh my gosh, that was extremely exciting, but I'm glad it's not going to be repeated. So we just have to take this, take excitement as being, yes, a good thing on the one hand, but might indicate a surprise. Okay, now that being said, Pluto, being the planet of power, is also the planet of the exercise of power, which in the terrorist case would be a roadside bomb or some sort of terrorist activity. In the United States case, it would be a more overt, quite likely military action, but not necessarily. It could be a major thrust on the diplomatic scene, but definitely dealing with power. That's why the military is, one of those that would be on the top of the list for being manifesting through this. So what have we got? We've got a big surprise dealing with either violence and exercise of power, or a shift in power. So here's the two things that come out of that for me. If this is talking about the next 4 years, that shift of power could be that Bush gets reelected and that through the aggressive use of our military and the diplomatic efforts, that we really do crush much of terrorism, and hopefully we will also expose the portions of the European governments that were corrupted and that were corrupt during the Oil for Food program, and we'll get a lot of stuff straightened out here. And you know what? The UN could be a servant of the well-being of this globe if we could get it out of the hands of the greedy and the folks that are sabotaging the very aims of the UN. But until that happens, it is a poisonous organization, no question about it, in my opinion. So, one thing, Bush winning, overcoming terrorism, and cleaning things up and really changing some things. That would be dynamic and wonderful. Second thing, perhaps Kerry gets elected. That certainly is a shift in power, and we're going to see a very different style. It's going to be more diplomatically oriented, much slower using military, if at all, and the surprise that comes with Kerry, I'm afraid, is less likely our exercise of power. Candidly, by astrology, I would say it makes this a little bit more likely the exercise of power or violence by the terrorists. Now, personally, you're going to see that we've got a couple more things here that add up for me to a very genuine concern about a terrorist strike, either immediately before the election, but I think actually more likely immediately afterwards. I think the terrorists have figured out that if they hit us before the election, it might boost Bush's chances, and so they're going to hit afterwards, which not only allows Kerry to have at least a chance, but secondly, will convince Americans that the terrorists could care less who we elect, and that we are as vulnerable under Kerry or Bush as we are vulnerable under the other. And that it would be the most devastating of impacts of an action taken by them to make us feel unsafe under any and all circumstances, which certainly a strike immediately after the election would be. It would prove that Bush couldn't provide the security that up till now he has, and we've got to give credit where credit's due. On the other hand, if Bush isn't reelected, if he is reelected and then we're hit, they prove that Bush doesn't have a magic solution, which we all should know, but so far it's worked, you know. So it would be very, very devastating to have that track record of success on the Bush administration and our resistance to terrorism here at home be washed away. It would be terrible. Second thing, let's look at if Kerry is elected. Certainly, being struck right after the election will show that the terrorists don't care about Kerry, that they are after us tooth and nail, that they're not going to fall for any of the subterfuge of what they would call subterfuge, at least, of negotiation and trying to work things out. Not only that, I think the terrorists realize that I don't think Kerry's going to sit around and just let things go. I really don't. I know he's not as aggressive as Bush, and I think that's true, no matter how much he screams reporting for duty and all the rest of it. But certainly, he will go after these people, I think, tooth and nail on the diplomatic level and on the financial level. So they're scared of Kerry too, and they really hate the United States, particularly our culture. The reason why? Because we like to put businesses into places, and our businesses carry our culture, which unfortunately is much more licentious, sexually oriented, and promiscuous, and those kinds of things than a lot of these other cultures. Now, Europe makes us look like prudes, and that's true. But we're not invading Europe or let's put it this way. The Europeans have a strong enough culture that is not threatened by our licentiousness and our looseness. The Muslim world, however, has a culture that is severely threatened by that. Now, I'm not taking sides here, although I think it's very wrong to subjugate women as second-class citizens. That's just my feeling about things. But it is certainly also true that debasing the value system of a country and a culture by imposing your own because greed and profit drives it doesn't make it legitimate. So they do have a complaint. It's very poorly, they're trying to resolve it in a very stupid way. I don't think America's going to sit by and be struck. Even Kerry's not going to sit by and be struck. People will say, well, Clinton sat by and was struck in Africa at the embassies and with the coal. Well, that's all very true. But 9/11 changed everything. And anybody who doesn't think that is, they're stuck in a pre-9/11 mindset. And that is foolishness. And if Kerry's stuck in that mindset, he too is a fool, but I don't think he is. Let's go on. The next thing, actually happening on the date of the election again. So this is very, very potent. We have Mars, the planet of violence and hostility and, injury, death, fire, explosives. Mars is not to be trifled with. Comes to a conjunction of the signature of death. Now, I'm not pulling any punches here because the Saturn-Chiron midpoint is one of the toughest midpoints on the planet to live through. I've seen people die under this signature. I don't think it causes death, but it is present when people pass away, particularly when people pass away under, unfortunate things like car accidents or, arson or something terrible like that. So what have we got here? On the very day of the election, we've got the god of war, Mars, coming to the signature of death, Saturn-Chiron. Well, I'm sorry, folks, but that really makes me concerned for a terrorist strike either immediately before or soon after the election. This only happens once every 2 years. So granted, we don't have a terrorist strike every 2 years. That's very, very true. But when we have things loaded up like an election and a terrorist activity that is as upset with us as all those terrorists are for Israel, for Iraq, for our messing with Iran, all the rest of it, legit or not, there's a real risk that these people are going to come after us. I'm worried about it. I think Mars coming to the death signature Saturn-Chiron is a genuine concern, and that happens on the day of the election. I'm hoping we don't see some suicide bombers. It's very definitely a possibility. Mars likes to work solo, one at a time, and Saturn-Chiron is the signature of death. Wouldn't surprise me if we have some of that. Lord, please spare us. The day after the election, which is still, of course, extremely, extremely potent as an indication of what's going on per the election, we have Uranus, the planet of disruption and even chaos, coming to what? The midpoint of disappointment, the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. Now, folks, I'm sorry, in 2 days, to have the very two worst midpoints, the Saturn-Chiron midpoint and the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, activated in a negative way in both cases, is very, very concerning. Now, that doesn't mean something absolutely will or must happen, but I'll tell you what, the keg is primed, the fuse is lit. It will take something like what we saw at the end of January 2004 when the United States government prevented the flight of a couple of British airlines and a couple of French airlines. I am absolutely convinced that we avoided being hit at that point, because at that point we had some of the most terrible and violent signatures in the United States chart that could be reckoned. And here we have something very similar occurring. Now, we dodged the bullet before through intelligence and swift action. That very well might be the case here. May it be so. Let's take a look at what else we've got here. Also, candidly, if there is some sort of strike, these two signatures would suggest that we as Americans have to be extremely mature and not overreact and start taking out on perfectly innocent people our rage. And it happened after 9/11. And it would probably happen to a greater degree now, particularly if it was done on a larger scale than 9/11. And particularly if it was done right at the election. I think that would just, that would light people up. I know it would light me up, but you see, visiting violence on an innocent person is not going to solve the problem. It just makes more hatred. So, visiting violence on those who deserve it, that's a whole different thing. A whole different thing. Then, what have we got 2 days after the election? I'm sorry, it's an unfortunate thing, but it might have the solution in it. What we have is Jupiter and Venus coming together in a different way than we discussed at the beginning of this episode. And it's coming together in what we call the longitudes, and at the same time it's coming to the exact conjunction with the third worst of all of the midpoints, the Saturn-Pluto midpoint. Saturn-Pluto midpoint is a picture of coercion through violence and oppression. That's not good. And Jupiter and Venus are coming to that place. Now, what could that mean? Well, ideally, that would mean that a solution to this oppression and this compulsion under force is going to be found. Jupiter and Venus are very often solutions and success and resolution to a problem. Praise the Lord if we can find a resolution to this problem. On the other hand, Jupiter, Venus, as we said before, can be complacency and greed and self-centeredness. That can lead to being struck because we're complacent. Oh, I'm hoping that's not the case. And particularly immediately after the election, many people, hopefully not in the intelligence and security folks, but many people will be wiping their brow and going, oh, we made it. Well, that's right, when they might strike because our guard is comparatively down. So let's not get complacent. Let's continue to be alert. You know, this also, Jupiter, Venus coming to Saturn, Pluto, has a signature that would suggest that the existing power structure, i.e. the Republican Party, and therefore Bush and his control of the Senate and the House of Representatives, will be perpetuated. It may take a couple of days for all that to shake out. Particularly some of the Senate and House races might be so close that it takes several days for the counting to be finalized. Hopefully this is not an indicator that we're waiting a couple of days because of fraud and all like that. But, you know, come on, folks. There are literally thousands of lawyers on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, waiting for the election to step in and to file whatever objections they have. We can expect this election to be the most litigious, the most fought over, the very possibly the most postponed for results election that we've ever seen. And it's almost inevitable with the growth of the participation of lawyers. I'm sorry, I come from a law family. I have great respect for the law, but you can pick a fight in the law if you try hard enough, and if 1,000 lawyers get working at it, you're going to find 100 ways to pick a fight, and that's going to delay results. That's going to delay certification of results, and it's not a good thing. That holds everything up in the air and makes the election process look foolish, to be candid with you. That's the election, and you know, a couple of days later, we've got Pluto paralleling Chiron. At worst, Pluto is the planet of extreme violence, like the atomic bomb, and Chiron, according to many astrologers, not so much my own reading, but I have to admit that sometimes it operates this way, it represents the wounded healer. When Chiron and Pluto come together, according to a lot of folk, that's a risky time. That's right in the middle of this month. So again, after the election seems like a more risky time. And then right towards the end of this month, around about the 20th or so, we have a couple of very difficult things that once again suggest that after the election is when the strike will happen, if it happens. Number one, the Sun parallels Saturn. Almost always a sad time. And I would suggest that anybody contemplating starting a new business avoid the second half of November. It's not a good time to start a new business. Not necessarily because the economy is going to go down, but because I think you're going to be working uphill almost continually. Then, as we get into the 25th through the end of the month, we've got these two things going on. Pluto goes opposite Mars exactly as it did at the end of January and the beginning of February of this year, when we canceled several British flights and several French flights, and in my opinion, dodged the bullet of another terrorist strike. So that's coming up at the end of the month. And so is Mars coming to that Pluto-Chiron conjunction. Now, it's actually a parallel, if you want to be precise, and you're an astrologer listening to this. Mars comes to Pluto and Chiron in the declinations. That's, you know, Pluto already is feisty and very revengeful and hostile enough. Now you're throwing Mars on top of it. That happens between the 20th and the 30th of November. I'm hoping that we're going to dodge the bullet again. I believe we can. I really do. And if we do, it's to our credit. It doesn't prove astrology wrong. Actually, that January time was precisely when I was most fearful of the next big strike. And we did take care of it. We should be very proud, but we cannot become complacent. In this election, let's not vote self-interest as much as wisdom. Now, what that means for you is in your heart and in your mind. I'm not going to project what my call is. I hope you've enjoyed this. Give me a call. I'm available for a free 10-minute reading, and I'm very serious about that. I love doing this work. I'm delighted to hear from you. Give me a call. My phone number is 406-723-8255. That's 406-723-8255. And if you'd like to email me instead, email me at Planet Tracks. That's 2 full words, Planet Tracks, no space between them. And it is tracks with an S at yahoo.com. That's planettracks@yahoo.com. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Hope you've enjoyed this. This election is as complicated as it looks from here. I'm sorry astrology can't straighten everything out on this call. I'm looking forward to discussing all this with you about the inauguration. We may see something very different. I'm looking forward to it. Give me a call. My name is Albert Stevens. This has been Exploring Astrology. Enjoy.
Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Removing the Veil. My name is Gwinn, and I'm going to be speaking again tonight about the Revelation of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah fulfills prophecy from the Old Testament as the second coming of Christ, the return of the light that came 2,000 years ago, and he fulfills prophecy. He doesn't just claim to be this, but he actually fulfills prophecy from the Bible, showing us that this is a reality. Tonight I'm going to be reading from just one of the prophecies that Baha'u'llah fulfills. He fulfills many prophecies organized in the form of what we call name, date, address, and mission. That he is prophesied by name in the Bible, by date, by address of where he came to, and by his mission of what he's doing. And what this essentially reveals is that these are like 4 points identifying a definite person as fulfilling prophecy. Jesus fulfilled prophecy of name, date, address, and mission as well. And we go through this information in the Bahai Firesides, which are free classes that we offer to the public. So this is just one aspect of the prophecies for the mission, or not the mission, I'm sorry, but a little bit of the mission, but also of mostly the address and the times revealing the coming of Baha'u'llah. And I'm going to be reading from a different version of the Bible than maybe many people are familiar with. And this is called the Septuagint version of the Bible. The Septuagint was the version of the Bible that was translated from the Hebrew into the Greek 500 years before the coming of Jesus, so circa 500 BC. This particular Septuagint version was translated into the English from the Greek in the late 1800s. And there is very, very, very tiny type. So I kind of have to get close here to read this. And what it says in English is, "Moreover, he brought me to the gate looking eastward and led me forth." And in the original languages that the Bab and Baha'u'llah spoke in, such as Arabic, the way that you say this gate is you say the Bab. So wherever it uses the words that are translated, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, I'm going to actually say those words. Now to explain this, the Bab means door or gate when it's translated into English from the Arabic. And Baha'u'llah means the glory of God, or the glory of the Lord, the glory of the Father, when it is translated into English. So when I see these in here, I'm going to translate it back into the original languages. "Moreover, he brought me to the Bab, looking east, and led me forth." And what this is talking about is that just as Jesus prophesied in John chapter 10, that the good shepherd is going to come in through the door or the gate, and this is how you can recognize him. Sure enough, Baha'u'llah, fulfilling prophecy, was a follower of the Bab, who arose in Persia, in the Middle East, modern-day Iran, and was a forerunner to Baha'u'llah, much as John the Baptist came preparing the way for Jesus. So here it says that he's looking at this Bab, and this Bab is looking east, and what this is that the Bab, at the end of his ministry, before Baha'u'llah, the dawning of Baha'u'llah, that the Bab was west of Baha'u'llah in Azerbaijan, and he was looking to the east where Baha'u'llah was going to be coming from Persia. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel, so the way that we say that is, and behold, Baha'u'llah of Israel came by the eastern way. And he's of Israel because he's descended from David. And he would be going to Israel. And he came by the eastern way, and there was a voice of an army as the sound of many redoubling their shouts. And the earth shone like light from the glory, from the Baha, round about. And the vision which I saw was like the vision which I saw when I went in to anoint the city, and the vision of the chariot which I saw was like the vision which I saw at the river Chebar. And I fell upon my face. And if we refer, this is from, I'm sorry, I never mentioned this, this is from Ezekiel, the 43rd chapter. So if we turn to look at his original vision in the very first chapter, where he's talking about what he saw by the river Chebar, starting in verse 26 of chapter 1, he says, And lo, a voice from above the firmament that was over their head, there was as the appearance of a sapphire stone, and the likeness of a throne upon it. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as an appearance of a man above. And I saw, as it were, the resemblance of amber from the appearance of the loins and upwards. And from the appearance of the loins and under I saw an appearance of fire, and the brightness thereof round about. As the appearance of the bow when it is in the cloud in days of rain, so was the form of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of the likeness of Baha'u'llah. So he sees this man seated upon the throne, and there's a rainbow, which is a symbol of the covenant, the everlasting covenant that God renews periodically, such as with the coming of Jesus and then with the coming of Baha'u'llah. That he's seated on the throne, and this is the throne of David. Like I said, he's a Christ, descended from David and seated upon that throne. Continuing back in Ezekiel chapter 43, reading from verse 4, And Baha'u'llah came into the house by the way of the gate looking eastward, and the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner court. And behold, the house of the Lord was full of Baha. And I stood, and behold, there was a voice out of the house, and one speaking to me. And a man stood near me, and he said to me, Son of man, thou hast seen the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, in which my name shall dwell in the midst of the house of Israel forever. And it says right here that this glory of the Lord, this glory of God, was not some nebulous spirit or just a puff of light or something like that. It said, And I stood, and behold, there was a voice out of the house, and one speaking to me, and a man stood near me. That's Baha'u'llah, this person that actually came bringing a message of the glory of God, just as Jesus was an actual person who came, and he bore a title called the Son of God, which had to do with his revelation. So this is a person with a place of his throne and with soles of his feet. That is, this is a man having feet. And it says, He will dwell in the midst of the house of Israel forever, and the house shall no longer profane his holy name, and so on and so forth. This is just one of the many, many prophecies proving the claim of Baha'u'llah to be this messenger that God has sent into the world for the salvation and redemption of mankind. If the peoples of the world would just turn to Baha'u'llah with a true heart, a sincere and pure heart, and with an open mind, the nightmare condition of the world today, with all the warring and the factions and the hatred, could be done away with virtually overnight. I'm going to be reading a little bit from the Revelation of Baha'u'llah. This is from the Kitab-i-Gan, the Book of Certitude, meaning the Book of Faith. I'm going to be reading starting from page 97. Verily, he who is the day star of truth and revealer of the Supreme Being holdeth for all time undisputed sovereignty over all that is in heaven and on earth. Though no man be found on earth to obey him, he verily is independent of all earthly dominion, though he be utterly destitute. Thus we reveal unto thee the mysteries of the cause of God, and bestow upon thee the gems of divine wisdom, that haply thou mayest soar on the wings of renunciation to those heights that are veiled from the eyes of man. The significance and essential purpose underlying these words is to reveal and demonstrate unto the pure in heart and the sanctified in spirit that they who are the luminaries of truth and the mirrors reflecting the light of divine unity in whatever age and cycle they are sent down from their invisible habitations of ancient glory unto this world, to educate the souls of men and endue with grace all created things, are invariably endowed with all-compelling power and invested with invincible sovereignty. For these hidden gems, these concealed and invisible treasures, in themselves manifest and vindicate the reality of these holy words, quote, Verily God doeth whatsoever he willeth, and ordaineth whatsoever he pleaseth. And this is a saying that we have in the Bahai faith that we understand applies only to God and to his manifestations, these greater prophets such as Jesus, Muhammad, Baha'u'llah. No one else has any share in this to be able to just do whatever they want as if there isn't a God who is in charge of everything. These manifestations, such as Jesus and Baha'u'llah, would never do whatever they want, for they are in complete submission to the will of God. Baha'u'llah continues on page 98. To every discerning and illumined heart, it is evident that God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immensely exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporeal existence, ascent and descent, egress and regress. Far be it from his glory that human tongue should adequately recount his praise, or that human heart comprehend his fathomless mystery. He is and hath ever been veiled in the ancient eternity of his essence, and will remain in his reality everlastingly hidden from the sight of men. No vision taketh in him, but he taketh in all vision. He is the subtle, the all-perceiving. No tie of direct intercourse can possibly bind him to his creatures. He standeth exalted beyond and above all separation and union, all proximity and remoteness. No sign can indicate his presence or his absence, inasmuch as by a word of his command all that are in heaven and on earth have come to exist, and by his wish, which is the primal will itself, all have stepped out of utter nothingness into the realm of being, the world of the invisible, into the visible. Gracious God, how could there be conceived any existing relationship or possible connection between his word and they that are created of it? The verse, God would have you beware of himself, unmistakably beareth witness to the reality of our argument. And the words, God was alone, there was none else besides him, are a sure testimony of its truth. All the prophets of God and their chosen ones, all the divines, the sages, and the wise of every generation, unanimously recognize their inability to attain unto the comprehension of that quintessence of all truth, and confess their incapacity to grasp him who is the inmost reality of all things. The door of the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, being thus closed in the face of all beings, the source of infinite grace according to his saying, his grace hath transcended all things, my grace hath encompassed them all, hath caused those luminous gems of holiness to appear out of the realm of the Spirit in the noble form of the human temple, and be made manifest unto all men, that they may impart unto the world the mysteries of the unchangeable being, and tell of the subtleties of his imperishable essence. These sanctified mirrors, these daysprings of ancient glory, are one and all the exponents on earth of him who is the central orb of the universe, its essence and ultimate purpose. From him proceed their knowledge and power. From him is derived their sovereignty. So what Baha'u'llah is saying here clearly is that these manifestations, such as Jesus, Baha'u'llah, Buddha, Moses, received their revelation, the knowledge of God, from God himself. And what we understand in the Bahai writings is that they received this through an intermediary referred to as the Most Great Spirit. Then they reflect this Spirit to us in the form of the revelation. And if we turn to it in our hearts and with our minds, we can receive what is like unto a branch or a ray of this light, which is what we call the Holy Spirit. He continues, the beauty of their countenance is but a reflection of his image, and their revelation a sign of his deathless glory. They are the treasuries of divine knowledge and the repositories of celestial wisdom. Through them is transmitted a grace that is infinite, and by them is revealed the light that can never fade. Even as he hath said, there is no distinction whatsoever between thee and them, except that they are thy servants and are created of thee. This is the significance of the tradition. I am he himself, and he is I, myself. So what Baha'u'llah is explaining here is that these manifestations of God are not literally God incarnate. Rather, in an analogy to explain this, it would be as if the people were in a dark, cold cave, shut out from the sun of God's light. And the manifestation would come along, these prophets like Jesus and Baha'u'llah, like a pure, polished mirror, and turn and ask the people in the cave, would you like to see the sun? Would you like to perceive the light of God? And they would say yes, and the manifestation, this pure, polished mirror, would turn in such a way that he could reflect the light of the sun into the eyes of the people in the cave. And they would feel its heat upon their faces and turn to it with love and with joy. And if they were to say, I can see the full disk of the sun in the mirror, that would be true. And if they were to say, I'm receiving the heat and the light of the sun from off of the mirror, that would be true. And if they were to say, and yet I understand that the mirror is standing in the sun, this too would be true. But none of this means that the sun has literally descended from outer space to come land on the planet Earth, come land literally in that mirror. No, rather, the rays of the sun are the bounty of the sun, coming from the sun, and they come and they are reflected off of this mirror into the faces and the eyes, the hearts and the minds of the people in the cave, and then they can benefit from this light and from this heat. So in this way, in this analogy, it's not a literal analogy, of course. The sun is composed of hydrogen and so forth. So this is not a literal analogy. Rather, it's just an analogy, a parable, if you will. So the sun being like the light of God, and the mirror being these manifestations such as Baha'u'llah and Jesus and so forth. So we're going to have a short evening tonight. There are a lot of things going on within the Baha'i faith. I'm in the process of publishing a paper which I'm willing to share with any of you Baha'is out there, or anybody who's even interested who isn't a Baha'i. This paper is called Removing the Veil from the Hidden Guardian of the Baha'i Faith. It's very interesting, somewhat scholarly, but I think it also has a good pace to it, and a lot of people have read it already and have liked it. And there's a deadline for this paper that I was supposed to have completed, so I'm kind of under a bit of a rush here. So tonight we're just going to have a short program. But I'm going to end leaving you with a prayer, a statement from Baha'u'llah, and a prayer from Baha'u'llah. This is from Tablets of Baha'u'llah, the La'i Maqsood, starting on page 176. Baha'u'llah says, warning, indeed, the actions of man himself breed a profusion of satanic power. What is Satan? Before I continue reading more on this, I have to explain this a little bit. The satanic, people always tend to think that there's this dark being out there that is a god, similar to God, to have powers, to have sway, like almost like a god himself. Now, this is impossible because there's only one God, and this God is the God of love, mercy, justice, fidelity, concord, harmony, generosity, infinite qualities and attributes. There's no God beside God. There certainly isn't a competing, negative, dark God who's trying to run the show in competition with God. Not literally. What is the satanic is that human beings have an animal side to their natures. And usually, all too often, their ego is caught up in these animal desires and drives for supremacy, for survival, and so forth. And when this animal is in control, and these animalistic ego drives are in control, it prevents the soul from coming to life, from advancing and evolving. And this is the satanic condition. So Baha'u'llah says, indeed the actions of man himself breed a profusion of satanic power. For were men to abide by and observe the divine teachings, every trace of evil would be banished from the face of the earth. However, the widespread differences that exist among mankind and the prevalence of sedition, contention, conflict, and the like are the primary factors which provoke the appearance of the satanic spirit. And for this reason, in Baha'u'llah's covenant, he says, shun reviling, maligning, slandering, shun conflict and fighting and arguing and all of these types of negative things. So as Baha'is, we strive to live up to these ideals, because without each one of us striving to manifest these conditions in our own personal lives, how is there any hope for peace on earth? It has to start at home. It has to start in each person's own heart. Baha'u'llah continues, yet the Holy Spirit hath ever shunned such matters. A world in which naught can be perceived save strife, quarrels, and corruption is bound to become the seat of the throne, the very metropolis of Satan. How vast the number of the loved ones and chosen ones of God, who have lamented and moaned by day and by night, that haply a sweet and fragrant breeze might blow from the court of his good pleasure and dispel altogether the loathsome and foul-smelling odors from the world. However, this ultimate goal could not be attained, and men were deprived thereof by virtue of their evil deeds, which brought upon them the retribution of God in accordance with the basic principles of his divine rule. Ours is the duty to remain patient in these circumstances until relief be forthcoming from God, the forgiving, the bountiful. And then he reveals a prayer for the coming forth of this breeze to dispel the odors of Satan from the world. And so I'm going to read this prayer as our closing thing that we're going to get into tonight. Magnified be thy name, O Lord of all beings, and desire of all created things. I beseech thee, by the word which hath caused the burning bush to lift up its voice, and the rock to cry out, whereby the well-favored have hastened to attain the court of thy presence, and the pure in heart the dayspring of the light of thy countenance, and by the sighing of thy true lovers in their separation from thy chosen ones, and the lamentation of them that long to behold thy face before the dawning splendor of the light of thy revelation, to graciously enable thy servants to recognize what thou hast ordained for them by thy bounty and thy grace. Prescribe for them then, through thy pen of glory, that which will direct their steps to the ocean of thy generosity, and will lead them unto the living waters of thy heavenly reunion. O Lord, look not at the things they have wrought. Rather, look unto the loftiness of thy celestial bounty, which hath preceded all created things, visible and invisible. O Lord, illumine their hearts with the effulgent light of thy knowledge, and brighten their eyes with the shining splendor of the day star of thy favors. I entreat thee, O Lord of names and creator of the heavens, by the blood spilt in thy path, and by the heads carried aloft on spears for the sake of thy love, and by the souls that have melted in their separation from thy loved ones, and by the hearts broken for the exaltation of thy word, to grant that the dwellers of thy realm may unite together in their allegiance to thine incomparable word, so that they may all acknowledge thy unity and thy oneness. There is no God but thee, the omnipotent, the most exalted, the knowing, the wise. I fain would hope that he who is the all-sufficing, the inaccessible, may heed the solicitation of this lowly servant, may attire the people of the world with the raiment of goodly deeds, and purge them from evil inclinations. He is the mighty, the powerful, the all-wise, the all-perceiving. He heareth and seeth. He is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. Yes, verily, he is the prayer-hearing, prayer-answering God. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Good night.